Warning! This review will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen the episode by now, I advise you do so before watching this video. If you decide against this advice, however, you waive the right to inquire about legal recourse in regards to your hurt feelings, because it's all your fault. Also, if you spoil future episodes in the comment section, a fate worse than death will be coming your way. I'm back from New Orleans and I'm over my jet lag, which means I can finally start reviewing MLP once again. And sure, I missed 3 episodes, but they will be reviewed in time. And I wasn't gone for that long, so surely nothing cataclysmic happened while I was away, right? Oh, you sons of bitch! Remember the rule, guys. If you spoil an episode in the comment section, death is coming your way. I don't just put it in the spoiler warning for a reason. It will happen, so please keep your typing fingers away from your brain. As for today, we're going to be taking a venture back to Mount Aris and Seaquestria, this time with the CMCs in tow. Let's find out what potential bounty or sea of trash we come across. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pones N Stuff. The episodes of Season 7 that focus on the socio-political issues of another creature's country proved to be very frustrating. They all were too serious and didn't leave a lot of room and movement for either its temperament or tone to make them enjoyable in most aspects. On top of that, the last CMC episode that we saw, Marks and Recreation, fell under the same problems. So it's painfully obvious what this episode needed to do to be good in my eyes. But more importantly, on top of all that, unlike the yaks, the changelings, the dragons, and the griffins before them, the hippogriffs and sea ponies are a clean slate for the writers to work with, and there surely is no way they could mess that up. We've only seen these characters in a feature film where they were fearing for their lives, so seeing them now after all of that hoopla has cooled down should be very interesting, especially when it comes to the growth of the species as a whole in the lore, and it gives the writers the ability and freedom to strip away the rigidity that other species have. So what did they do? They created a world, a landscape of Mount Aris and Seaquestria that was actually harmonious for once. You have no idea how refreshing that is, because after going to the Dragonland, Yakistan, the Changeling Hive, and Griffinstone, to where all of them fell under the same tense, awkward, and dense socio-political landscape, to find a place where pretty much everyone is content and happy with life, even though they had to make a choice as to which species they were, most of which have come to terms with, that is a fantastic thing that shows that they aren't just plucking a conflict out of thin air to ruin the utopia they sit in. Except when it comes down to one person who is indecisive, the meek and accommodating yet conflicted Terramar, who I may add has the best name in the whole show's history because his conflict is choosing between land and sea, but his name, Terramar, is Latin for land and sea. That is the kind of signifier and plot-specific note that I love to see in this show. It's attention to detail that just makes me smile, and the writers deserve a medal for that. The thing is, there's a lot more to this character than you may realise, as he's much like Pinkie Pie in Party of One, making a mountain out of a molehill, and driving the plot forward as his worries continue amongst the backdrop of this seeming utopia that's around us, providing contrast to the surefire happy tone and creating a relatable protagonist to side with. And while it may seem like it's a meagre contribution to proceedings and comes across as such as unnecessary, when the themes of belonging, identity, and tradition over new beginnings enter the fray, it gives this character's plight and the episode overall some heavy weights to carry, which are facilitated and amplified in Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo's enthusiastic and pessimistic arguments, with Apple Bloom acting as the consensus between them as a representation of the current toxic political climate we humans will recognise from the news. As a result, this simple quest for the CMCs becomes a lot more than it seemed on paper, as it provides exposition from an outside source, leaving the character at the centre of it all not having much else to do, which means his reaction hits harder than it ever could once all floats to the surface. Both of the distracted CMC members have selfish and exuberant character personalities reflected from past episodes come through nicely, so it doesn't come across as brash and abrasive when they are revealed, while the episode utilizes an unusually framed but strong narrative and thematic structure to give us a dramatic yet heartwarming and uplifting story that used its tension for cause and effect, combined with a stoic pace, giving time to explain every detail, all the while balancing it all out with Twilight Sparkle's overexcitable comedy, as she uncovered more world building for an area we've only got fleeting glimpses of before. It's quite a fantastically bloated collection of narrative items, buoyed further by impassioned and well-executed voice acting from all concerned, which when combined with the well-done writing, where the CMCs stand their political ground, while Twilight breaks the ice with laughter aplenty, while Terramar is conflicted to all seams, while his parents are blissfully unaware of what his son is feeling, and everyone else is having a whale of a time, not literally of course, it makes you just realise how well constructed it all is. And of course there are a couple of little issues, with a rushed conclusion thanks to the expository nature of the stories backing everything up into a corner where not much was done to ensure it flowed well at the end, and a reliance on exposing two worlds at once being an excuse for that. It's almost a home run on the substance front, which considering the prior episodes of its type is a welcome relief to see. So as you can tell, unlike those past episodes, everything comes through like a battering ram, albeit one with very sneaky footprints, as all the characters were not tokenized, flanderized, or inserted out of place. They all executed themselves well with cohesion and simplicity, which is all quite fantastic. However, I have decided to leave one little interesting factoid out when it came to the story and the writing, because, well, it ties in with the message for a start, which I'm about to mention. On top of that, secondly, it ties in with a Season 5 episode who had to also deal with a touchy subject, albeit with very familiar kid gloves. Tanks for the Memories lumbered around with its subject of death in such an avoidist manner that it was almost comical, despite the fact that the episode was still pretty good regardless of that. So using divorce in this one as a thematic plot device, while making it as amicable and non-confrontational as possible, seemed like it didn't fall very far from that Season 5 tree. But unlike replacing the death of a relative with a hibernating pet to trivialize it, it stood as a great undercoating to the themes that define Terramar's conflict and its subsequent family values and individuality moral to a T. It provided the ammunition for a message about you being you and having loving friends and family to offer the support you need to be yourself against all the negative feelings that you believe the world has, as it hit home with such power that Terramar's release of frustration and relief was a major highlight of the season thus far. Now sure, not all kids at home whose family setup could be in a poor state will end up relating to this, but it offers up the notion that belonging and family are ubiquitous, but it can be adapted to give you the grounding that you need with those you consider family against what your bloodline says to make the best of the situation. It builds up from the moment the bipartisan land versus sea conflict came into view and was a little more on the nose than I expected, which makes its good news against all odds mantra feel more impactful than it had any right to be. This was a message that I know some may take the wrong way, but it works so damn well as far as I'm concerned that it's one of the strongest, despite an albeit waveringly late setup being pushed into motion by that rushed conclusion that I've already mentioned. It was well worth getting to, and my god, it was fantastic to watch. On top of that, stylistically, I was in for a real treat, as for the first time in a long while, William Anderson got his finger out of his arse and complemented these two grandiose locations and our characters' emotional woes with the musical power they needed to take them over the top, with scores, genre, stylings, and emotional power, which really made every single moment feel like it was worth listening to, as they signified all that we needed to to relate with the characters and feel their emotions. While Your Heart Is in Two Places did feel disjointed at times, but it came through with a rousing wrecking ball to add to the CMC's burgeoning catalogue of songs that just keep supplying the goods. I had a massive smile on my face because while the settings looked nice, they weren't supported by the animation that they needed, but the music did all it could, and it was so good to hear. Speaking of the animation, actually, it had a good amount of facial expressions, the CMC design to sea ponies, the multiple musical number transitions, which of course if you've been watching my videos long enough, you know I was going to get excited about, and of course the occasional but very nicely done sequences and bright colours of said settings gave this episode some scope, but it lacked in power over its runtime as we've seen sea ponies and hippogriffs before, to where it didn't hold any surprise to the viewer, and it meant that while it did enough to get by on its merits, it was the lowest point of the whole experience, as it joined along for the ride but got left behind by an episode that did more than its fair share to say that it didn't need stark visuals in the long run. I do have one last burning question that I need to get off my chest. How the blue hell did that scroll remain legible and not sodden to the T despite being thousands of feet under the water by this point? Good lord, I know Sweetie Belle mentioned that she could be pruning being underwater that long, but the fact that that scroll is still legible is absurd. And okay, there are a few moments of logic like that jump straight over the head and don't come back, but it doesn't dampen the fact that this was a very, very good episode indeed. At the end of the day, all I want while watching this show is to be entertained and have fun. But honestly, I went into this episode feeling like it wasn't really going to be that special. I thought it was going to be a standard CMC episode, which given past history was going to be decent and give me something to at least shout home about. That's at least what I was expecting. However, what I wasn't was the fact that looking back on this review, I spent most of my time raving about it, so colour me speechless that the writers and showrunners have made, finally, a socio-political discovery episode that was well worth the time that they spent making it. They made it as emotive, heartwarming and fun as it could be, despite the static limitations its plot would have set in stone otherwise. It got past that obstacle and ensured a lack of animation and a rushed ending couldn't dampen its efforts. This was an episode that did all it could right, even while carrying a conscientious subject on its back, and giving us music, morals, themes and story alongside great character writing and voice acting to just revel in. It may have seemed underwhelming on the surface, but when you add up all the sum of its parts together, what we have here is an episode with concrete direction, one that knew what it wanted to do and strived to achieve it. Now, it may have failed in one category, but excelled almost everywhere else to where there is very little that I can actually complain about. It's the kind of surprise that I love seeing from this show, when a piece of gold is pulled out of the proverbial dirt that the show has produced over the years. This was a down-to-earth adventure that has me excited to revisit Mount Aris and Seaquestria again sometime soon, which is a saying I've rarely been able to highlight with vigour when visiting other places in this universe. So yeah, hippogriffs, sea ponies, and whatever the blue hell and in-between abomination hybrid looks like. You are the best species now, you hear? If you put out another episode like this, I will pledge allegiance to Queen Novo and join you without hesitation, because every other species hasn't done what it needs to put themselves over the threshold into a best episode ranking. You may not agree, but I'll take this to the bank and cash it in for all it's worth. Overall, Surf and or Turf scored a total of 21 out of 25, which is an A-. In closing, this episode may have seemed wafer thin on paper for good reason, but thanks to underlying complexity, quality music, and brilliant writing and voice acting that was so seamless and good in the continuity of the characters and the world around them that it all made sense, this episode looked to be way more than the sum of its parts looked on the outset. I knew we were going to return to Seaquestria and Mount Aris at some point, but I never expected it to be so enjoyable, so fun, and so interesting, and so emotional, and just so good. And it's a refreshing turn on what these kind of episodes have been, where they usually try to burden you with very heavy socio-political themes that dogmatize it and take it away from enjoyment. This was the opposite, and my god, was it worth seeing. I waited over 2 seasons for an episode like this. In fact, not since Gauntlets of Fire have I been this happy visiting another part of Equestria. This is why this episode wins, because it just proves that simplicity can be deceiving, and when it romps home with the goods, you know it is worth it. Next time round, we have horseplay to deal with. Now, is that going to be as fun? No pun intended. Well, if it's executed as properly and as well as this one has, I am in for a right treat. Then again, it could also fail, but that's the beauty of these reviews. I have no idea what to expect going into any episodes, unlike some of you who have watched ahead already. You can keep your mouths shut, because I want to experience more things like this, where I am surprised, overjoyed, and happy. Knowing last season it may not actually go that way, but hey, I need to stay positive, we all do, because that's the only way that this show and this fandom can survive. I have been Freddie Thomas, you've been people watching, this has been an episode of Pones N Stuff for the CC Network, and I will see you all next time.